So with Facebook established in 2004, Instagram in 2010, and other social media accounts like Twitter, etc., social media has consumed our lives, consumed the lives of most of the people in the world today. Although most people do find joy from those social media sites, there are several negative impacts that affect their lives whether they realize it or not. My name is Vince, and I'm here to tell you that social media has a significant negative impact on society. My argument tonight is based on 3 key points: that social media gives a false sense of connection, leads to cyberbullying, and decreases productivity in the workplace. So with my first claim, false sense of connection, Stephen Strogatz from Cornell University states that social media sites can make it more difficult for us to distinguish between the meaningful relationships we foster in the real world and numerous casual relationships formed through social media. In other words, the real world versus cyberspace. And an example of this claim that we're all familiar with is you'll see people in the quad hanging out, 4 or 5 people. They're next to each other in real life, but they're all on their cell phones. They're all engaged in that social world when they're right next to each other in the real world. My second claim about cyberbullying talks about how social media can cause people to terrorize others in front of their peers. Cyber attacks can cause mental scars and affect emotional stability in others, and allows people to distinguish themselves as others on the personal from those other personal attacks. The American Academy of Pediatrics, also known as the AAP, gives a few statistics about teenager cell phone usage and social media data. So 22% of teens log on to social media more than 10 times a day. 50% of teens log on more than once a day. 25% of 75% of those who actually own a phone use it for social media purposes. There is a distinguish that parents nowadays are getting less involved with what the new trends are as far as social media with technology, and so they can't help educate their children to be aware of those certain attacks and those certain circumstances. 42% of the teenagers that were surveyed said that they were victimized by cyberbullying. According to a 2010 CBS News report, cyberbullying can cause depression, anxiety, isolation, and even sometimes suicide. My third claim that social media decreases productivity in the workplace comes from the Houston Chronicle, where they state that while many businesses use social media sites to find and communicate with their clients, the sites can also prove a great distraction to employees who may show more interest in what their friends are posting than in their work tasks. Part of the statistics they provide is that Facebook shaves 1.5% of office productivity, and also that British companies have lost $2.2 billion a year from the social phenomenon. In a survey in 2013 based on 750 employees, 69% of those survey takers reported that they waste some time at work on a daily basis. In 2014, so 1 year later, that number from 69% increased to 89%, where people admitted that they wasted time during work. These results indicated that 47% of people were wasting 1 to 2 hours roughly on a daily basis, while 4% admitted to wasting over half their day while they were at work on non-work related tasks. So in conclusion, my argument tonight is that social media has a significant negative effect on society. So don't let social media control your life, and I encourage you to disconnect when possible, play nice, and stay focused on the real world.
All right, Vince, proposition's clear, good layout of the contents. Internally, the structure's all fine, so organizationally, everything's going well. The supporting material, I think, is a little bit thin in a couple of places. The idea that people can't differentiate between real and cyber relationships is generically suggested. There's not really much proof here, except you have a vague reference to some research on the particular subject. Your example is okay, but it's a hypothetical example of people on the quad. Here's the one that I always like to use. Over the years that I've noticed there's been a change. When I was not in class or when I was not talking, people would talk to each other in class, you'd have conversation, that sort of thing. Now I come into class and I'm getting set up. Nobody's talking to each other, they're all on their phones. So I think I understand the example that you're talking about. What you need to do is you need to show us that there's some harmful consequence to that as a result we have fewer sets of friends, we have a less useful social network. You got a social network of people who give you likes, for instance, but you don't have anybody who can give you a ride in the middle of the night when your car breaks down. You don't have somebody who can back you up when it's time for help on a homework assignment, something like that. So you have to show us that there's a problem with these cyber relationships that makes them insufficient in comparison to the real relationships. You just kind of assert that there's a problem there, and I think that that's missing. On the cyberbullying issue, the notion that cyberbullying exists, I think there's probably not much doubt about that. That it's linked to some negative things. I don't think there's a lot of doubt about that. Here's the question that I have. The one thing that you make reference to is, people being more depressed and maybe even suicides. So I'm looking for where's the data talking about, for example, the suicide rates from 2004 and before, where people did not have access to the social media, and since. I assume that because there's so much more social media and kids, especially adolescents, for instance, are on their phones getting cyberbullied all the time, that we would see a substantial increase in those numbers there. We don't really have any data like that. That bullying takes place online is probably true. That it's any more ubiquitous or frequent than it was beforehand, or that's created a unique problem, that I think is the thing that needs a little bit more argument in your point. The issue about productivity is the one that you seem to have the best data on. You had some good information about how much time people waste. In Great Britain, there's a study that talks about how they've lost $2 billion in productivity. I do think that you acknowledge at the beginning that there's ultimately going to be a comparison that's made here that the advocate or the respondent's probably going to talk about, say, okay, so we lost $2 billion in productivity, but we increased because of social media our business territory or our consumer base or any of those sorts of things by a substantial number, so it's a reasonable trade-off. If I sell 6 billion more items, then I'm not all that worried about losing 2 billion worth of hours because I've sold more and that kind of thing. The productivity thing. And the other thing I think is that the data that you have talks about how they waste time. I assume that there's a link to the social media there, but it wasn't. I didn't see that was in those particular quotes. It's probably in the article someplace, and that makes perfect sense. As presented, though, it wasn't quite clear. It says, you just had number 69% admit wasting time at work. I'm going, well, people have been doing that for their whole life. I mean, forget cyber, social media. We got a world full of lollygaggers who've tried to do nothing forever. And I'm not exactly sure it's social media. You ever drive by, I'm sorry, I don't want to point fingers at public employees or anybody else. If you ever drive by one of those construction sites where they're working on a project on the street and there's one guy digging a hole and 10 guys standing around watching him digging a hole, isn't that wasting a bunch of time? And they're not all on social media in that situation. All right, thank you.